After the Battle of Guadalcanal, the Japanese had spread into basically this part of the world. There were the home islands, Korea, Manchuria, J-Hole, coastal China, French Indochina, Siam, Burma, into British India, the Dutch East Indies, American Philippines, of course, Taiwan, uh, and Papua New Guinea up to the Owen Stanley Mountains north of Port Moresby. The Solomon Islands, except for Guadalcanal, we had fought them off of that in a 6 month campaign, and the Central Pacific, including the Marshalls, the Gilberts, the Carolines, Marianas, Volcano Islands, and the Ryukyus, and the Kurile Islands up here. So, and southern Sakhalin. The British are going to, with the help of American special forces like Merrill's Marauders and the Chindits, who are British, they're going to fight their way back through Burma towards Rangoon. But that campaign is going to receive almost last priority among all the Allied campaigns. We're also going to fund and support in various ways the Chinese nationalists and communists in their fight against the Japanese. We also are going to support Vietnamese communists under a guy named Ho Chi Minh, telling him how to maximize his potential for guerrilla warfare. And that won't at all come to haunt us in the future. Luckily, the Americans are wealthy enough to afford, with their with our industrial output, a variety of priorities. Remember, we had agreed that Europe was going to be the first priority, and it was. Now, the British thought we'd basically go on to the defensive in Asia, but the American Navy under Admiral King refused. He said, "No, we're going to advance. This is a Navy war in the Pacific. It's an American war in the Pacific." And after Midway and the destruction of the four of the six major Japanese aircraft carriers, we have the Japanese on the ropes. We've trained pilots like anyone else. The Japanese train their pilots like samurai. They start at Harry Potter year one age and work their way up. And when those pilots are killed at Midway and later during the grinding battles near Guadalcanal, like Santa Cruz, they can't be replaced. And without aircraft carrier pilots, aircraft carriers are big flat-top targets. So, King wants to have an attack from Hawaii go through the Marshalls, the Gilberts, bypass the Carolines to the Marianas, up to the Volcano Islands, and up to Japan. Basically a variety of old war plan orange. But there's also General MacArthur, who's in Australia and who's leading the forces in the Owen Stanley Mountains north of Port Moresby. And what MacArthur says, MacArthur has a unique stature. MacArthur was the most decorated American officer in World War I. He was the commander of the force that got rid of the bonus marchers in 1930 under Herbert Hoover. He was the first field marshal of an independent Filipino army as the Philippines were getting ready for independence in the 1930s and 40s. And he was also several times a real contender for the Republican candidacy for the President of the United States. And what MacArthur says to Roosevelt is, if you don't fulfill my promise to return to the Philippines, Asians will never trust us because they'll never think that we'll bleed for yellow people the way we bleed for fellow white people. And that works. Roosevelt agrees that the Philippines are going to be a campaign a worthwhile target too. So there are two axes of advance. There's the Central Pacific advance under largely Navy control, and there's the Southwest Pacific advance on New Guinea, where MacArthur is getting closer and closer and closer to the Philippines. Now, as he is doing this, he's not hitting them where they are. He's hitting them where they ain't, is the expression. Because this is all about air bases. The entire Pacific War is about air bases. These islands act as unsinkable aircraft carriers, and if you have an air base, you can control the sea around them. So the island hopping in the Southwest Pacific under General MacArthur and in the Central Pacific under the Navy, under Admiral Nimitz, is all about securing airfields on islands, building airfields on islands, and air bases, because with air power you can dominate the sea. Finally, in mid to late 1944, both the southwestern axis of advance and the central Pacific axis of advance are going to converge. They're going to converge into what is going to be the largest Navy battle in global history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The American plan is to take the island of Leyte in the central Philippines and then go north to Mindanao. The Japanese plan, their ships are dispersed because of their lack of oil. There are a few ships in the home islands, particularly their aircraft carriers. Their battleships are down here on Borneo near the oil fields. So when the Americans show where they're going to land in the Philippines, the aircraft carriers are going to make a diversion attack to draw off the American aircraft carriers. Once the American aircraft carriers see that there are Japanese carriers moving south, they'll go north and leave the beach open. Battleship forces from Borneo will go south of Leyte through the Surigao Strait and north of Leyte through the San Bernardino Strait and destroy the American offshore forces, and in doing so will destroy the American hopes of invading Leyte in the Philippines. As good as the Navy has gotten, it can't beat battleships of the Japanese at close range with escort carriers, with land weapons, and with landing ships. You need carriers and battleships to do that. So the Japanese plan actually works amazingly. The Americans spot the southern force heading for Surigao Strait. We hit it with aircraft and then leave a battle line of old Pearl Harbor survivor battleships to block Surigao Strait, and they crush the Japanese advance there. As the force, the northern force, the most powerful Japanese force, approaches San Bernardino Strait, they are hit by aircraft from the American carrier fleet, and they seem to be sunk and retreating. So Admiral Halsey assumes they're going to continue retreating all the way back to Borneo. And when he hears that there are carriers moving in from the north, Halsey tears bottom north to meet them. Here's the problem. Everyone knew that when Halsey had to leave to fight carriers, he would detach what is called Task Force 34, the modern fast American battleships from the carriers, to block San Bernardino Strait. Now, the way Aircraft Carrier Task Force was worked, in the center, you've got 1, 2, or even 3 aircraft carriers. Then you've got an inner ring of battleships, and you've got a central ring, an inner ring of battleships and heavy cruisers, a central ring of, this backwards thing is carriers, battleships and heavy cruisers, light cruisers, and around them are picket destroyers designed to spot enemy incoming craft. You detach the battleships, make Task Force 34, block the strait, and the carriers go north, and the new battleships fight their Japanese new battleships, and the old battleships fight the old Japanese battleships. Except Halsey doesn't think that these new battleships from Japan are coming. He thinks they're going back. So he does not detach Task Force 34. Instead, he goes terror hiding north with the battleships. And suddenly, 3 American escort carrier groups, basically tiny little merchant ships with old planes and land attack bombs not fit to attack a ship, suddenly see steaming over the horizon the biggest battleship in human history, the Japanese battleship Yamato, with 18-inch guns that can shoot a minivan over the horizon. The only ship ever to deploy 18-inch guns. And it's among Americans' escort carriers, little tiny carriers, and escort destroyers, little tiny sub-destroyer class. This is the Japanese goal. They're about to destroy the American landing ships. But the Japanese admiral panics. He mistakes the little escort carriers for fleet carriers, our big ones. He mistakes the escort destroyers for battleships. And instead of ordering a line of battle attack to destroy these American landing forces, he panics and goes, general attack, which means every ship for itself, fire independently, and he loses the benefits of being a fleet. But still, the Japanese begin slaughtering the American ships. and plane crews. We start doing almost suicide attacks on the Japanese, almost, because we're not trying to die. And our destroyer escorts and destroyers come in to launch torpedo attacks and machine gun attacks on massive Japanese battleships, which is crazy. But the ferocity of the American defenses causes the Japanese admiral to panic. We'll come back to him. Meanwhile, Admiral Nimitz in Hawaii, the commander of the Pacific Fleet, sends a message to Admiral Halsey. Where is Task Force 34? But all of our messages were interspersed with nonsense words to fool the Japanese code breakers. And the nonsense words that came right after, where is Task Force 34? Was the world wonders. They were nonsense words. But Halsey interprets it as a public rebuke. The world wonders where you put your battleships, dumb bottom! So Halsey's humiliated. He detaches his battleships too late to do any good. And basically is furious. Meanwhile, the Japanese admiral is not furious. He's panicked. He's spooked. This is too easy. It's too easy. It's quiet, too quiet. It's easy, too easy. And he eventually orders a retreat because of the ferocity of the American defenses. He is sure that the American planes are going to come over the horizon and sink all his ships to no good. Had he not panicked, we would have lost the Leyte beachhead, and possibly we would have not been able to invade the Philippines. It would have been the first American failed amphibious attack in ages, because the U.S. Marine Corps had gotten really good at landing on a hostile beach, which is the most difficult military problem in modern warfare. As it turns out, we win the Battle of Leyte Gulf because the Japanese admiral panics, even though the American admiral misplaced his key battleships. However, at the end of the battle, a new horror is unleashed into the world.